Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Brockwell Park Community Greenhouses Gardener's Question Time for Saturday, the 16th of May. The eagle-eyed among you will notice that I am not Alice. So first of all, thank you very much to Alice, volunteer and trustee at BPCG, for hosting last week's episode for me while I was in transit. You will notice I've changed background again. I promise this is the last lockdown location for me. I also promise this will get less bland as episodes continue. On the schedule this week, we've got a few questions, which we will submit to members of the panel, which is mostly me and Doug, I think. We also have, Kate was recently a guest on a Sustain, the enterprise webinar on food growing during kind of COVID, during this transitory period of coronavirus lockdown. So we're going to show a brief extract of that because it has a really interesting update of exactly what is going on at BPCG to sort of continue food growing during this challenging time. We have a really nice BPCG walk around from Kat, which is about 5-10 minutes. So I'm just going to show that in its entirety. And then there's a few little bits and bobs at the end as well. So hopefully that will take us through for the whole hour. Just a couple of reminders. First of all, if you've just joined the meeting, you will come in on mute. Feel free to take yourself off mute at any time, especially if you have a question that you would like to ask me or any members of the panel. But just as a housekeeping measure, we kind of keep everyone on silent just to try and preserve the voice quality for the connection of the Zoom. And just a reminder that this is also a space for volunteers to meet and chat and hang out. So once the recording is over at the end of the episode, if you would like to stick around and get updates on what's happening at the greenhouses or just hang out with other volunteers, then that is super cool by me. Right, so let's dive in. First of all, I have a question from Diane. Bear with me just a moment while I get the text up. Hello, question time. Hi, Diane. I have some cucumbers in 3-inch pots, which are just developing second leaves. When potting up in their final pot, what pot size do you recommend? I have some homemade compost and some multi-purpose at my disposal. Would half of each be a suitable growing medium? Okay. Now, cucumbers, they grow pretty big and they need a lot of water. So in terms of what sort of pot size you need to pot them onto, how big can you manage, I think is probably the first question. Bear with me a moment. I found it's really difficult to compare pot sizes just from an image, right? Because it's so difficult to get the scale. But I would say you want at least probably something that's at least 12 inches across, so about 30 centimeters across, and about 8 inches, 20 centimeters deep. So you want a let's go, that's what, about 6 liters. I would say a 7.5 liter pot or above. Bear with me just a moment. I have, here we go. So that's a 7.5 liter pot. It's quite difficult to get the sense of scale. That was kind of the best one that I could, the best image that I could find that really seems to represent the size of the pot as you see it. Yeah, so you need something fairly big and fairly deep. Cucumbers require a lot of water, so it's going to have to be something with a good amount of drainage as well. So plastic pots obviously are great because they'll come with those holes in the bottom as standard. You may want to chuck some gravel or broken pots or something in the bottom there before you start adding your growing medium. As to the mix of compost, sort of homemade compost and multi-purpose growing medium, I mean, it depends a little bit, obviously, on the sort of the texture and consistency of the compost that you've made at home. Cucumbers do require quite fertile soil and they do require quite moist soil. So homemade compost is definitely worth adding to the mix. With that said, it is almost always the kind of the structure and the texture of your growing medium that is going to have the biggest and most immediate effect on how well the plants kind of bed in and start growing. Cucumbers are definitely going to need a little bit of feeding if you can acquire some fertilizer. Infrequent feeding with especially once the fruits start growing, with a potassium heavy fertilizer. If Chris were here right now, I'm sure he would interject with the seaweed product that we use at BPCG, but I'm afraid I can't remember off the top of my head. I want to say SW 5, but I don't know if that's correct. So you will, if you can feed with a sort of a potassium heavy fertilizer at some point, that would be great. But in terms of mixing your compost and the growing medium, what kind of texture does it come out at, really? Like if you can get a nice consistent tilth, if you can pick out most of the big kind of unrotted bits, as long as it doesn't sort of smell too pongy, if you've got sort of food waste and stuff in there that's been breaking down, and it's all a largely consistent color and texture, then that will be fine. I would definitely recommend, if it's just multi-purpose stuff that comes out of a bag, I would definitely recommend, if you can sort of, don't sieve it by any means, like no one has the time for that, but do really get in there, massage any kind of big clumps and stuff out, so you've got like a nice even texture all the way through. Like I said, you're going to need a big pot. You're going to need to water them pretty frequently, and I would certainly say the biggest pot you can get your hands on, but I would stick a trellis in there to start with, right? You're going to need something for it to grow out. Cucumbers do need a fair bit of space. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that I can think of. The other good aspect of having a large pot is that, in my experience, and this may just be because I'm not very good at doing them, cucumbers in containers are quite a big risk for powdery mildew. They need a lot of water, so you water them a lot, but then that means, depending on where they are kind of in your house or flat or garden, the containers probably stay a little bit too humid and too moist, and you get mildew developing. So it's a trade-off in terms of where can you find that's got a good amount of ventilation, but is not super windy or super hot. It isn't just going to dry your soil out really fast, because, like I said, they do need a fair bit of moisture in the soil, and otherwise you're going to struggle to water them with enough frequency. So hopefully that answers your question, Diane. Oh, bear with me just a moment while I admit some extra participants. Yeah, the biggest pot you can get a hold of would be my answer to that. At least 7.5 liters or above. Make sure that it's got adequate drainage. If that means you've got to plug some holes in it or something, and make sure you've got something at the bottom, either sort of gravel or broken up pots or something like that to aid the drainage there as well. We're going to move straight on to our next feature, which is Kate talking at the Sustain webinar on food growing in Corona. She's got a really good update on exactly what the greenhouses are doing to kind of to moderate and sustain our own supply of food for the community. It was a really good presentation. I am going to inquire, first of all, big thank you to Sophia from Sustain for letting us have the footage, and I'm also going to ask if the whole webinar is available to view somewhere online, and if so, when this video goes up on YouTube and ends up on the BPCG website, I will I'll include the link to the webinar there. So bear with me just a moment, and we'll start the video off. Oh, bear with me just a moment, folks. Why won't it let me share the screen in full view? That's so frustrating. Share. I don't know why this is. I don't know why this has suddenly chosen to stop working. I've definitely shared this on multiple times. Bear with me just a moment. Let's see if that. There we are. Okay.
Great. Well, I'm just going to talk 5 minutes about our response as a community gardener to Corona COVID. I think I've suggested we had 5 aims, and our first was to keep volunteering going. We've got 2 enormous greenhouses, and the timing of COVID was extraordinary. I mean, whilst we've had this incredible spring, it was also very dry, very hot, and we had absolutely loads and loads and loads of seedlings. Sorry, I can't give an exact numeric on that. But massive tomatoes, chilies. We grow a lot of plants for sale. It's one of our key income streams. So a priority was to to keep those plants healthy, and also to actually, keep our volunteers, as many as we could, coming in. But clearly, we had to change our operating model, which is normally a very open drop-in model, with volunteers coming 4 days a week, whenever and for however long they like. We couldn't operate like that. So we developed a sign-in rota, where we allowed 4 volunteers on site at any one time, with 1 person supervising them. It's just under an acre, so it's quite a big site. So there's, huge amount of social distancing in a site of that size. We've said no lunch, no refreshments. If people want to bring in water bottles, that's fine. I think there's been a lot of talk already about the mechanisms of spraying hard surfaces, but all of that was explicitly stated in the sort of contract, if you like, to the volunteers that we asked to come in. We had to be selective. We've got hundreds, 800 people registered as volunteers, though we probably only see about 200 of those over the year. But we had to actually select about 60 volunteers that we knew were pretty self-reliant and would be able to manage. So they were invited to sign up. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, if people are working sort of outside of our gates, which are currently closed, we've just got some very light barriers that we put around them, so that if, for example, they're watering in the borders outside in the park, we just put a barrier around them so that there's a sort of 2-meter distance ensured from anyone who's passing by. Where people needed to work together on something, we asked them to come as a household couple.
It seems to me that the sound has dropped out on Kate's video. Is that okay? People are nodding. Radio. Excellent. Wow. Technical issues abound this week, I'm afraid. Bear with me just a moment. I'm going to stop my screen share. Bear with me just. I'm going to just double check and see if I can fix that. But no, unfortunately, it seems like the okay. The issue that I have here is that there could be 100 different things wrong, and rather than kind of correct them on the fly, I'm just going to say that is an excellent video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to investigate why the sound has dropped out, rather than snarling us up here. And I'm going to upload that directly to the BPCG website and the YouTube channel, so you can watch that as well. I really would recommend watching it. And as I said before, if I can get access to the entire webinar, which is fascinating, it's about 1.5 hours long. So it's a good long piece of content. I confess, I actually put it on in the background and kind of listen to it like a podcast. But it does give a really good sort of explanation on how BPCG is continuing to operate from a sort of growing and horticultural perspective during the time of COVID. On that note, let's go straight into our next series of videos, which is a walk around from Cat, from the greenhouses themselves, which I think is going to be super useful, just because it gives us a real indication of exactly what is happening from a crop perspective. And I also think that, I know I've said this before on BPCG QT, I really think that Kat is a fantastic presenter, and we should try and get her on the TV, because that would solve a lot of, probably solve a lot of budgeting issues for BPCG, and she really is rather great at it. So let's find her on the screen. And let's dive in with our next video.
This is our potatoes bed. We planted it just before lockdown. So here we have 2 rows of salad blue, which is an iridescent kind of blue potato, really exciting. So these ones here. And then we have, I'm trying to remember the mixture, the squirrels have been taking out the labels, but we have Apache, which is a nice one with kind of blotches on it, red blotches on it. We have the Isle of Jura, and we have Rooster, which is a red potato. So you can look, just take a panoramic view. Our potatoes are looking very good. And the point at which we harvest them is when the tops start to die down, then they're ready to harvest. So they've still got a bit more growing to do, but they're looking. So now we're at the tomato bed. So we started our tomatoes off in the greenhouse, and last week we planted them out. We have mostly cordon tomatoes. So this bed, and you can see there's tomatoes all the way down here. We have green zebra, golden crown, which is a lovely yellow tomato, cherry tomatoes and long vines, black Russian, moon glow. I'm trying to remember the other. I think we've even got a plum tomato. So these will actually become quite tall plants. They're up to about this height, and we actually harvested a lot last year. So different coloured ones. I think they should look really nice. So these are the cordons, and then we'll go over to the other bed where we've got a mixture of cordons and bush tomatoes. The second tomato bed that we have now. The cordons, we have them 2 in the bed to leave enough room. Moving down, we come to our bush tomatoes. And our bush tomatoes are in front of the apiary, so the idea is they won't grow particularly tall. These ones will grow to about this height, and we should still be able to see the bees over the top of them. So we've got garden pearl, we've got lemon sherbet, we've got tiny Tommy. So the varieties that we've been selling, we've got here as well, so examples in the garden. And as they're bush, we don't have to take the side shoots out, so watch this space. Right, here we are, the lower garden. This is the roots bed, and we have garlic from the Isle of Wight garlic farm. These 3 are elephant garlics, and you can see they're significantly larger than the others. The rest we actually planted in the autumn. They're coming along really nice.
Bear with me one moment, team, because I'm just going to determine as to why it's so incredibly zoomed in, which I don't think is the was the intention. Just a moment.
The others. The rest we actually planted in the autumn. They're coming along really nicely. Should be ready within the next month. You can see they're dying back slightly, so when they die back we'll harvest them. And then just down here we have I think 3 or 4 different varieties of carrots. You can see they're just coming through. And then we go down here, we have salsify, which is also a nice, salsify and schizonera, which are nice root veg. And down here, but it hasn't showed yet, we have 5 rows of parsnips. Parsnips are a little bit slow to come up, but they should be here sooner or later. So that's the roots bed. Quick look in the brassica bed?
Yeah.
Oh, good. You could probably look in here. So this is our brassica bed. We are growing our Savoy cabbages in here. So there's a January King with Carl Bosch, and it does need a bit of weeding. But anyway, you can see that they're developing kind of quite well under our insect netting. Probably need a little bit of water as well.
Okay, so apologies that was ever so slightly zoomed in at points. There's a little bit of sort of mismatch between my video software and Zoom, I suspect. But once again, that video will be up on the BPCG website if you want to take a walk around with Kat. I think the message to take from both those videos is that it's still happening, right? Like the natural world does not slow down. I know we are all living through particularly surreal and challenging times, but the world outside just kind of carries on, and we're doing our best to facilitate and kind of maintain our involvement in that. We are going to move on to our next question. So I have a question from Ursula, who's not here right now in the chat, but I'm sure I will speak to at some point soon. She wants to know, she would like some advice on how to make sure the plants that we buy, which come out of the greenhouses, should be treated to give them the best chance of survival when we get them home. So how not to murder that plant that you just bought. A little bit of prep is, I guess, the best answer that I can give. Although it is very tempting, and I have done this a million times myself, to see a plant in a greenhouse and go, "Ooh, that looks great," or "I would love to have one of those," or "I've never tried growing something like that before, so I would love to bring it to my house." Most plants that come back from garden centers or greenhouses like ours that come home and just quietly die in a corner do so because the conditions where they are put are just not correct for that plant. And in an ideal world, you would just change the conditions for the plant, right? You would just put them in a different place, look after them in a slightly different way, and everything would be hunky-dory. But I think especially for those of us that live in London, the urban space is not always your own. It's not always customizable in the way that you would like. And a lot of time you just don't have a lot of it, right? Like many of us don't have a south-facing window in the whole of our domicile, right? So you have to just kind of make do and mend. So the first thing that I would recommend is do a little bit of research before you purchase. And the most straightforward way of doing that is just ask to see if the plants have been moved, for example, at BPCG, if it's out on the sales table out at the front, or if you're performing sort of our dead drop facility. So if you've bought the plants online and then you're coming and sort of bending your allowed kind of exercise schedule to come past us and pick them up, ask to see their growing conditions. And if the plant is thriving, have a look and see what those growing conditions are like. In the greenhouses, you will probably find it's getting a lot of light. It's significantly warmer than the outside environment. It's getting regularly watered because we have the over-the-top misting system, so it's getting a good amount of moisture. But if the plant needs a lot of light and is obviously thriving in a particular set of conditions, think and ask yourself and be really candid with yourself, can I mimic those conditions in the place that I live? And if the answer is no, then you are always going to struggle, right? If you have plants that require a huge amount of light, if you've got plants that require a particular set of conditions and you just can't replicate them in your house or flat or garden or balcony, then you're off to you're batting off a sticky wicket just to begin. So if you think you can kind of mimic the conditions, or you think you can get close enough, and you've bought the plant, the next thing I would definitely do before you take it home is make sure that you know both the genus and the species, so that when you Google it later, and there is absolutely no shame in Googling it later, I'm a horticultural student now, and most of the times when I buy a plant, I then get home and spend 15 minutes researching it online or looking it up in my much thumbed RHS dictionary of plants, just to see what the literature on it says. The three things to do when you bring a pot plant home are: first, to be on the safe side, I would recommend quarantining it. From BPCG, this shouldn't be a problem because we're really diligent in sort of maintaining the conditions and making sure that there aren't any kind of pests and diseases on plants that go out. Most garden centers should be doing the same. And obviously, because BPCG is a not-for-profit enterprise, we have absolutely no interest in selling unhealthy plants to anybody, regardless of the circumstances, right? So if you buy them from us, it shouldn't really be an issue. But quarantining a plant just to make sure that you're not going to pass on any bugs or any other kind of nasties to the rest of the things you've got in your house is probably a good idea. It also, during that period, depending on where you put it, you can kind of see how it reacts to those conditions. Is it getting enough light, etc.? Now, does it start to give you any sort of obvious warning signs? Yellowing leaves is the sort of the multi-purpose plant sign for help. I'm not really enjoying whatever is going on. Once you've moved it out of quarantine and you've put it hopefully somewhere where it's getting as much light as possible, there aren't really any true shade loving plants. Like light is a plant's primary food source, and they're all going to struggle without it. What I do is I add it to my schedule. I water, rather than watering, I have like a sort of plant checking schedule. Most issues that I think people have with pot plants tend to come from either watering too much or watering not enough. And that tends to come from either forgetting to water them, which we've all been there, or watering too frequently, because you have this time, right, where you water the plants and you go around and you do that one, you do that one, you do that one, you do that one. And that doesn't really fit with how the plants would be getting moisture in nature. The soil in nature tends to be fairly dry for an extended period, and then it rains, they get a good soaking, and then it's dry for a longer period, and then it rains again. Obviously in this country it feels like it rains pretty much constantly, but a good soaking when the soil is dry is the preferable watering strategy for the majority of certainly kind of container pot plants you will have, your sort of cheerful house plant that you might have in the corner of your living room. So I have a schedule where I just go around and check. I do it pretty much the same time every week, and I just go and have a look and see what the soil is looking like. And if it's dry, I give it a good dunk. And if it's not, I just don't do anything, right? And then the next bit of my schedule in a few days' time, I just go around and check it again, and that's how I kind of do it. I think overwatering pot plants is something that a lot of people do when they get home, because you bring the plant back and you think, well, what can I do to care for this new life that I brought into my home? I know, I'll water it. And it's probably being regularly watered at the greenhouses that you just bought it from. It's probably doing fine enough. So giving it regular watering straight away is probably just going to put a little stress on the plant and potentially start the roots rotting off. And the last thing I would say is, don't feel that you have to repot the plant unless it's painfully obvious that the plant needs repotting. If the plant is not in a sort of some of the modular things you get, so a plant pot where the diameter is measured in kind of half inches as opposed to full inches, then yes, you probably will need to repot that sooner rather than later, because it is quickly going to outgrow the size of its container. But unless you can see some evidence that the plant is pot bound and is starting to suffer from being pot bound, you don't feel super pressed to repot the plant straight away. The main reason for that is you've just changed the environment for the plant. It is going to be under a certain amount of stress. Even things like taking it out of the greenhouse, putting it somewhere cold for a bit on the way to your house, putting it in the car, all that sort of stuff is going to put a fair amount of stress on the plant, and it's going to need some time to acclimatize to its new home anyway. So it's not always the wisest thing to also dig it out of its pot, break the root ball up, put it into new soil and stuff. Maybe give that a couple of weeks, see how it acclimatizes to its new position, and then take steps to make sure that it's having a good time in your house and you're giving it the best possible conditions for it to thrive before you think about moving it on to a new pot. With that said, if you've got it in a plastic pot and there are the holes at the bottom and you can see that the roots are kind of starting to stick out of the bottom there, if there are other signs that the plant is definitely pot bound, then you may want to do that sooner rather than later. So yes, take the pot out. I would repot it to a size that's at least an inch above the pot that you bought it in. You want to give it some space to grow and expand. And if you have a kind of final size pot in mind, my suggestion would always be, like, you are no longer in the sort of the greenhouse growing conditions where, for practical space usage and and cost effectiveness, they go up in sequence through the pots. Think of the big pot that you've got in mind for the space that you want to put it in and just put it straight in there. Yeah, that's it really.
Can I just add something, Josh?
Please do, Doug. Yeah.
When it comes to positioning, if you've got a south-facing window, one of the things I find with indoor plants, you don't want to put them too near the glass. Yep. Because you can get scorch on the leaves, particularly some of the very evergreen glossy leaves as well. And I think the other problem a lot of people have is air circulation with indoor plants. I know it sounds odd, but you think the air would be changing. Sometimes what we do is we open our windows and make sure we get a bit of air circulation around them as well. I'm not the expert with the house plants in this house, by the way, but yeah, I love them anyway, because they really brighten up a room.
Yeah, so I think Doug's point about circulation is a good one that leads us on to a wider one, which is that plants did not evolve to live indoors, right? And plants have evolved to adapt to a variety of conditions, most of which fall into two cycles, which is day and night and wet and dry. indoors, we prefer it to be dry all of the time and pretty much and light most of the time, unless we're asleep. And so that can really that can be a big shock for the systems of plants, especially ones that are growing in greenhouses, which do their best to mimic those natural cycles as well. Obviously, greenhouses are, tend to be warmer than the average domicile, but a lot of the time, like for example at BPCG, we will regularly open the windows to try and let some of the heat out, like to try and simulate those conditions at night. It can get quite cold in the greenhouses at night, and that is largely deliberate. We're trying to mimic the growing conditions of the plants that we have, and so yeah, putting it in a window where it's getting really, really consistent hot sun directly on it may not be necessarily a great idea. We've spoken on BPCG QT before about a lot of sort of mid-century London construction will have the radiator directly below the windowsill. So you're getting a lot of light, but you're also getting a huge amount of consistent heat getting cranked up from beneath the soil. And yes, as Doug was saying, air circulation can often be a problem. If you are getting mildews, that sort of stuff, fungus, it's almost always to do with the fact that the humidity in that area is too high. And one thing that I like, this is a bit of a bugbear for me, is that I often see advice from lots of places online telling you to spritz your plants. And I know that there are certain plants that love a spritz, and it's a straightforward way of feeling like you're staying on top of the care, right? Every day you spritz over a few of them, but unless your plant has specific humidity needs, I would stay away from doing that if you can, because a lot of the time what you are going to do is raise the humidity in that area quite a lot. And if you don't have a nice sort of breeze or through flow, then you are going to, the air conditioning is going to cause the plant to struggle. One last thing I would say is try not to water it with like freezing water out of the tap as well, especially if it's just come in from new conditions. If you brought a plant in from the greenhouses and you're going to give it its first kind of drink, make the water lukewarm and pour it in around the base of the plant. Don't give it a huge dunk of freezing cold water directly onto the top of the plant, because that's going to cause a fair amount of root shock. It's going to up the humidity just around the area, and because obviously all that water has got to now evaporate from the surface of the plant as well. Water is always, or 99% of times, is taken up through the roots, right? Water vapor tends to actually be excreted by the plants through the leaves and stems. So getting the plant wet is mostly just going to interfere with that, and it's going to raise the overall humidity levels. So what do we got? Try and mimic the conditions that it's growing in and thriving in when you bought it. Make sure that you look it up and understand the genus and species before you put it down somewhere, so that you can give it the best kind of conditions in your home. My advice would be add it to a schedule of kind of checking that you have for your plants, so that regularly you are kind of just going and investigating the conditions and adapting and reacting to those, as opposed to just, it is Sunday afternoon, so all the plants get half a pint of water out of the tap. And don't feel that you have to repot it unless it is clearly crying out for repotting. Give it some time to acclimatize to the conditions in its new home, and then pot it into something else and give it some space and room to grow. Okay, let's just have a double check for questions. So obviously I was not hosting last week, but Kristen, you had some questions about, it was some sort of leaf curl, right, on trees that you have access to. I've got some photos that you sent. Would you like to kind of to just show them now? I appreciate that hopefully last week's panel answered your questions. But do you want to just give us a little visual demonstration of what you were talking about last week?
Yeah, last week's panel asked for, where I was, because I forgot to attend the Zoom.
Oh, I see.
So I wasn't there to answer. I couldn't answer their questions, so I'm trying again this week.
Okie dokie, right.
And I didn't send them any photos last week either. Now, do you want me to show the photos? No,
that's okay. I've got the photos here, so I will share my screen, and then if you wouldn't mind perhaps talking us through them. Bear with me a moment.
I'll tell you what last week's question was.
Yes, please.
It started with, we are responsible for 2 young almond trees in an orchard on our public green in Homewood Gardens. We're responsible for all the orchard really, but the 2 young almond trees have very, very bad peach leaf curl. And one, I wanted to know, when I remove all the peach leaf curl, because I know I have to do that, can I put it in the municipal waste? Will they heat it enough to destroy the fungus? And the second question is, what can I do to make these trees more healthy so they can resist the peach leaf curl? Then you can show the pictures. The pictures have got little titles on them, but I'll tell you if they don't come up.
Sure. Here we go. Okay.
So that is yesterday, the one that we hadn't pruned.
Cool.
That's pretty bad, isn't it?
Yeah. Let's see if I can. And that's a russet apple.
No, if you go through the pictures, I'll tell you each one. This is one of the almonds. This is the almond we hadn't pruned yet yesterday. If you go to the next picture.
Sure.
They're quite difficult.
Sorry, they may not be in the order that you sent them.
No, it doesn't. I'll describe each one. I know what they are.
Hold on. Are you guys still seeing my screen? Is this a pruned almond tree?
Yeah, we're just seeing the first photo.
Oh, okay, fine. Let me just see if I can.
I might try and get it up on my screen.
Sure why it's not opening in a
I should be able to share my screen. It takes bloody ages to open that. Okay.
Sorry about this, Kristen.
It's okay. I will. If I can share my screen.
Sure.
Hang on.
You should have permissions just to do that, Kristen. So you should be able to just use it from the green button at the bottom.
Yeah, share screen. Okay. Now, is that my screen now?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, let's move it along so I can. I don't seem to. Okay, I see how it works. Right, the next picture, that's the same almond tree that you're seeing the detail of that has not been pruned as of yesterday. So that's the state of it. The next one is the russet apple. That's got into the wrong order, but that I'm wondering what that is on the leaf of the russet apple. Is it peach leaf curl? Can russet apples get peach leaf curl? That's the almond tree that I pruned 2 weeks ago, which was the same as the other one. And these are the leaves on that, which may be getting a little bit more peach leaf curl. Oh, that's the quince. That's also got something wrong with it. And that's the green gauge. But let's go back. I just really want to ask about the,
Can I ask a question, Kristen?
Yeah.
Is this the first year you've had this disease?
Peach leaf curl.
Yeah.
It's the second year.
Okay. One of the issues you have to be really, really aware of with a virus and in a plant is you must be absolutely assiduous and clear away all the debris.
Right.
Almost every day, because that virus will lodge itself in the soil, and it will survive in the soil no matter what the weather's like. So you've got to be, your housekeeping's got to be perfect with a virus.
Okay, thanks.
And that also extends to things like the tools that you use to prune these trees, right? So make sure that once you've taken all the diseased tissue off, you're being really diligent about cleaning your secateurs or whatever it is you've used to make those snips with your horticultural solution, because they can survive on those surfaces for a surprisingly long time. And yeah, the worry is that either you're bringing it back to when you carry on doing pruning to that same tree, or you're spreading it to other trees and plants in the neighborhood. As to whether or not, as to how to destroy the materials and whether or not you can put it in the green compost bin. So I confess I'm kind of in two minds here, because I suspect that, yes, the council processes, and by the time that it's rotted up and all that sort of stuff, is probably long and hot enough to have destroyed the virus. However, you cannot make any kind of guarantees here, and I'm not an expert on the kind of disposal processes that your local council or authority may use. So the advice always is, if you're not sure, burn it.
Yeah,
I know that sounds, it can sound a little bit over the top, but if you're in any way concerned, destroy it completely on your own terms and in your own land. If you've got an incinerator, that's the best way of doing it. Bear with me just a moment, Rita. I'm going to take you off mute. Hi, Rita. Do you have something?
Hi, Kristen. I'm sure cremation is the best end for these diseased bits. I mean, I won't buy council compost because I wouldn't trust it. I don't know what people are putting into council compost. I compost all my own stuff, and I cremate anything as bad as this. Did you hear me, Kristen?
Thank you, Rita. It's a slight problem for our particular circumstances. I mean, we live in this terraced circuit of houses in Brixton Hill. We have a tiny little garden ourselves, where we don't have an incinerator in our own garden. It's minute. The green is a public space. It's a park, and we have this orchard that was given to us by the Orchard Project, and they were supporting us, but the Orchard Project have lost their funding because of leaving the EU. They were getting a lot of EU funding. So we don't have any advisors anymore, but we're just local residents, and we can't really have an incinerator on the public space. But this is our dog green. This is where people bring their dogs to run.
I understand absolutely what you're saying, but on the other hand, at Burgess Park, they have a community garden at Glengall, but they also have a particular barbecue area near the lakes. I don't know if you know Burgess Park. It's fabulous.
Not well, yeah.
Well, all you need is one of those takeaway barbecues, and you can barbecue this lot and get rid of them very, very quickly and simply.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll discuss that with the neighbourhood organisation, because we'd have to all agree to have something like that.
Sure. I mean, there are perhaps less finessed solutions available, which unfortunately are probably less in line with kind of environmental best practices. The one thing that you could do is take it to the tip and chuck it in the landfill waste, right? There are kind of ways around, but it really depends on how diligent you feel like. And I appreciate that this sounds like somewhat glib advice, but there are ways of disposing it that I mean, the other thing that I have learned in horticultural college is that if you can bury it deep enough, but obviously that's a huge amount of potentially back-breaking labour as well. According to the RHS, so most council composting facilities should reach, you know, the high enough temperatures, and I know that they do sort of, you know, just because of the mass amounts of waste involved, there's a lot of turning, and a lot of them use kind of hot fire compost anyway, where there's a heating regulation system. So technically that should be enough. So if you cannot find facilities for yourself to incinerate them, which obviously is best practice, then yes, you can probably dispose of it. The other thing is also, if you've got a green waste area at your local tip, you can come. I would just send them an email, go and ask, because there will be someone that knows about composting facilities, you know, in charge of that site. It's not the sort of thing you can't just chuck a load of stuff on a pile and forget about it forever, right? It's just that's not practical. So there will be an expert involved somewhere. So it's worth getting in touch and asking what their composting facilities are like and sort of what their processes are like. And if you are satisfied, then you can just send the stuff to the council.
I tried ringing Lambeth's garden waste scheme, because I'm allowed to put out 2 bags of garden waste every week, which they collect.
Yeah.
Which you have to, it's a paid for service to have 2 bags collected every week. And they have no idea what happens to their garden waste when you phone that phone number. They're just interested in how you subscribe. I
was going to say my next point was going to be, you are going to have to figure out a way to kind of climb up the top of that particular tree until you find someone that knows how, you know, what they're talking about. And obviously I know we all have a lot more time on our hands due to Corona, but probably not that much time. Whereabouts on Brixton Hill is this, Kristen?
It says, if you come up to the very top of Brixton Hill, just before the South Circular goes across it.
Oh, in Christchurch Road.
If you turn left just then, you go down Homewood Road and you come out into this green called Homewood Gardens.
Oh, is that by the bus garage?
Where the buses go to sleep at night, not as far up as the bus garage. Just there's a little.
Oh, yeah, they used to be.
The tramways, the tramways.
So not Telford Avenue, the one before, the stop before.
Before that, there's a church called Christ Church. If you go down the South Circular, and then you turn left at the church, and you come into Homewood Gardens. There are 4 different ways to come into Homewood Gardens, and the guys last week, the guys on the question time last week looked it up on Google Earth to see if they could see the almond trees, and they found our almond trees on Google Earth.
Well, I was going to suggest a slightly more low-tech solution, which is that now that I'm back in London and living in the Stockwell area, I might swing by, if that's okay, and have a look.
Yeah, well, if you knock on my door at number 12, you can stay on the pavement and we can chat from a social distance.
Excellent. Okay.
It would be really helpful to have some advice about just generally how to make these trees more healthy, as well as removing all the diseased material.
Kristen, how old are they? How long have they been in the ground?
They were our second wave of our orchard. Our first orchard, I think, I don't know why I can't remember, but I think we put the orchard in 5 years ago.
But
and I think we added the almond trees 4 years ago.
What about the quince and the apple, the russet?
The quince was 5 years ago. The almonds were 4 years ago. And actually the apple, the russet apple is only in we've only had it 2 years. It was a new one for an apple celebration. We planted just one.
Yeah. Russets are really good, robust trees. And I would say it might be a lack of water at the right time. You know, if the tree gets under stress, often all kinds of pests can attack a tree under stress. So have they been watered when they need it?
Well, that's a good question. Our advice at the beginning 5 years ago was to take over a tree each and give them 5 gallons. No, perhaps not quite that. Yeah, 5.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right.
5 gallons of water a week for the first 2 years. And then we thought that was it. So we haven't really been watering them regularly after their first 2 years.
Oh.
I mean, so that's that's probably in line with best practice, right? Like once a tree has quote unquote become established and has got, you know, a significant amount of follow through growth, like its first real kind of stretching out and unfurling, you're supposed to be able to not really irrigate them at all, right? The whole point is that they're supposed to be able to just get enough water from the environmental conditions. With something like peach curl, it may just be that they are under more stress and will need a little bit more water than that. The other thing that I would say for all of them is take all the fruits off. You know, when you see fruits developing for at least this year or next year, I'm not sure if you had plans for, you know, using that orchard or giving the food to local residents and stuff like that, but just limiting the energy expenditure of the plant is something that you can also do to help. Obviously, you don't want to go too crazy. Don't hack any of the plants to pieces and put extra stress on them. But, you know, it takes energy and it takes nutrients and all that sort of stuff for plants to come to fruit. And you may find that when plants are stressed, the main thing they do is go, help, I'm going to die, I better reproduce sometime soon, which is why horticulturists will often put plants under a degree of stress in order to get them to flower and fruit more successfully. But when you are thinking about the long-term health of a perennial plant like a tree, it can be best to just take all that stuff off, reduce its energy expenditure, and just allow it to kind of recoup a little bit and regroup. This looks quite severe, this peach curl, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's over for these trees by any means. As long as you are, I think, diligent with removing diseased tissue, take the fruits off, maybe up the watering a little bit, and then destroy that diseased tissue and make sure that you're sanitizing the area as much as you can, I think these trees will probably bounce back. Rita, do you have one more thing to say? And we're going to move on from this.
You need to keep rainwater off the bare branches of your almonds and peaches because it's a fungal, isn't it fungal?
It is a fungal, fungus, yeah.
So you, in the old days, professional, you know, or mansions would cover their peach trees and almond trees so that the rainwater couldn't splash onto the branches and the emerging leaves, because this is a perennial problem that's always, I mean, my comment would be I'd never try to grow almonds, definitely not, but peaches and nectarines are worth persevering with. But that is one of the complete problems that you'll always get to prevent that fungal infection.
So there is actually, if you head to the RHS website, I'm not sure necessarily how practical this will be for your sort of residence group, Kristen, but they do have, so a lean-to is normally the solution for this. So it'll keep the rainwater off, it'll change the humidity conditions for the plant, and it will also hopefully protect any other trees that are in kind of the splash zone for this fungal infection. They're fairly straightforward to make. You can download the plans from the RHS website for free. With that said, obviously, then you've got to make the flipping thing. And if you're not receiving funding, or if there's no kind of NGO or actual body who's taking, you know, financial responsibility for these trees, then it may be an investment that's a little bit beyond your reach currently. But perhaps we could chat about that another time after BPCG QT, and maybe we can rustle up a solution or two. Cool. Right, so we're going to move on. Oh, it's almost 3 o'clock. So, Kristen, first of all, yeah, thank you. If you mind killing the screen share. I think that is it for questions. I do apologize for the sort of the technical issues that we've had this week. I'm in a new house with a completely new audiovisual setup. So hopefully by next week, that will all be taken care of. Just a few little reminders and close of play sort of business. As you've seen from the videos, we are still kind of, oh, Doug, have you got a point to make?
I just want to make a quick comment. I've been distributing a lot of plants around the area for people who are coming back to me with pictures and saying, oh dear, look, my plant's not growing, what am I doing wrong, and everything like that. And one of the things I've noticed is the quality of the soil they're growing it in their gardens, because a lot of these people have never grown anything. So I'd like to do a little presentation next week about soils.
Absolutely.
And one of the issues I keep saying to people, I say, well, put a fork in the ground, turn it over and let me see it. And you've got ping pong sized
Yeah, I mean, I know I know you and I sound like broken records on QT every week, Doug, but it is obviously plants do need nutrients and your soil does need to be fertile and stuff, but it is the worked structure of your soil. And that's one of the reasons why adding organic matter is so effective, is that it decompacts the soil. It allows it to retain moisture and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, you can't just stick them in the ground, from on an untreated flower bed and expect them to thrive. You are going to have to do something to it. So I've got a question from Rita. Rita, would you mind, could we, because we're already at 3 o'clock and I've just got a little bit of housekeeping left to go, would you mind if we save this question for next week?
But can I just ask Doug, can I chat with you separately about the curriculum centre, which you said was the GLC?
Yeah,
I would like to, if we can private chat, and also
after this, yeah, we can stay on.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's no problem. I'll just keep the meeting open once the recording's done.
And also, please all sign the Save Avery Hill Park, because do you know, Doug, they're going to take over the old glass houses that we used to produce all the bedding plants. There's a commercial company have been leasing it. They're all going to be kicked out. And a good old, what's this academy? Harris Academy is going to take all that precious historic greenhouses and the stables. Everything's going to disappear.
Really? I guess that answers the question that I was going to ask before the end, which is, did Alice bring my my update on what's going on at Avery Hill last week? Is that, Rita, were you here?
Well, yeah, and I've been on the Zoom meetings for the Save Avery Hill whatever, and to be honest, the only people on there are concerned more about parking and traffic than about the loss of a historic site. I mean, those stables, they have to be seen to see, and they're back onto Pippin Hall allotments. So, the loss of that as a public amenity, I really do feel angry, and it's hopeless. These people have paid £1, Harris Academy, Greenwich University got that site for £1, and they just keep exchanging the ownership for £1.
Okay,
are you aware of that?
What I will do is, I think we'll probably come back to this issue next week, but what I will also do is in the description for this on the BPCG website and the YouTube, I will link the petition there. So if anyone is watching this non-live, you can go and sign up. You can go and sign the Save Avery Hill petition then. Because the last time I checked, it was not that far away from its designated signatory total, at least. So a little bit of a bump could make a real difference. A little bit of closer play business. Obviously, the greenhouses are still open. If you head to the BPCG website, there are tons of online products for sale if you would like to carry on supporting the charity during this time. If you head to the website or the YouTube, I've just finished uploading a series of 3 videos. If you are someone that goes to BPCG for gigs and for music, I've got 3 compilations of various bands, various gigs and concerts that have been held at the greenhouses over the last couple of years. It's just a really nice video, and it's just a reminder of more straightforward and more community focused times that will certainly be coming again, hopefully by the end of the summer. So that's good crack if you're interested in the BPCG sort of music elements. And that is it for this week's episode of Gardener's Question Time. So Rita, we will get back to your question next week, hopefully with a few technical issues. I'm going to end this recording, but it continues as a volunteer hangout for as long as everyone would like to stay. So thank you to everyone watching at home, and we will see you next week.
Bye,
Thank you,
Rita.
everybody.
Bye, Doug.
Yeah.
Bye.